Okay, so in my last video, I was talking about how you have to stop playing the game or various games in order to break free within this matrix, or at least to exercise a little bit of autonomy within the matrix and navigate it successfully. In order to do that on your own terms, essentially, it's going to require you to stop playing games that don't benefit you. Stop participating in any kind of games that don't actually benefit you. And I said in the video that I was going to do a follow-up talking about roles that people assign to you and how everyone that you encounter in this life, in this matrix, has a designated role that they want or expect you to play, and that you need to be mindful of that when you are engaging with people. I mean, every single person that you encounter, down to like your mother, father, any person that you encounter in this matrix has a designated role that they want or expect you to play. Like with your parents, your mother, your father, when you're born, there are a lot of expectations of the role that you're going to have in their lives and how they're going to interact with you, how you're going to grow up, what kind of child you're going to be, what kind of future adult you're going to be, even down to how you're going to look, your sexuality. It can be how you're going to benefit, how they expect you to benefit them or show up for them. All of those impressions are being put on you from birth, right? And even then, when it comes to the strangers that you encounter, I remember when I was trying to explain this concept to someone else, I gave the example of how, you'll be browsing a store. And for this specific reference that I'm going to refer to, it could happen to anyone, but I feel like the actual experience of it is more unique to minorities, people of color, specifically Black people. Especially, I think this is a very common occurrence with Black people. You'll hear some people say, when they're leisurely browsing a retail store, for example, and someone comes up to them and assumes that they work there, and they start asking them for help or assistance with something, and they essentially start assigning them tasks to do or asking them for help in the store, assuming that that individual works there. And in that kind of instance, that complete stranger has assigned or designated a role to you as a worker bee. They have come to the assumption, just by looking at you and how you present yourself, you could not possibly be in there shopping on your own time leisurely the way that they are. You just have to be working for this establishment. And that's the only reason why you're even in that store or able to afford the things that they can. That's the only reason you would even be in the same space, is because you're working there. Not because you're there because you can actually afford the items, or you can afford to be there shopping on your own time. Like you have the free time to just shop in that store. They're assuming that you must be working there. And those are the kinds of assumptions that are constantly occurring throughout life at all levels, whenever you're interacting with anyone. And when you're meeting someone for the first time in a social setting, they're always going to be assigning you a role of some sort. When you're meeting someone under the premise of friendship, they're assigning you a specific role. When you're meeting someone under the premise of a relationship or a potential relationship, romantically, sexually, or otherwise, they're assigning you a specific role of how they expect you to show up in their life. And as soon as you don't meet their expectations, you're going to receive some level of pushback or resistance from that person. That's when you encounter things like animosity or resentment or confusion. A lot of times, and I'm speaking for myself here, I'm someone that people tend to project onto a lot, and I project a lot of different, and they project a lot of different roles or expectations onto me that I don't even usually have any idea that they're doing it or they're assuming that I'm going to show up for them a particular type of way until they make it clear. And at which point I usually let it be known I don't have a desire to show up for them in that particular type of way, or whatever it is that they want me to be for them. Like in a friendship, relationship, I'm not interested in being anyone's like sidekick, flunky, personal assistant, therapist, nurse, teacher, chef. I'm not interested in any of that. When I'm seeking a friendship with someone, first and foremost, it's more of like an allyship, partnership, maybe even a sisterhood if it gets to that point. That'll be the only kind of level of like friendship dynamic that I will be seeking, or relationship dynamic that I'm going to be seeking from another person. However, a lot of times when you encounter people, they're not necessarily looking for an equal. They're looking for you to provide some level of service to them in some way, shape, or form. They're looking for you to be an asset to them in some kind of way. To do something for them, to operate in some specific capacity for them. They will have a completely different idea in mind for you that they either want you to fit into, like by force, coercion, manipulation, or even just by guilt and shame. They'll try to make you fit a desired role that they have in mind for you. And I think it's important to note that majority of people that come into this matrix have a very surface level thinking. They're very quick to draw assumptions and conclusions based on very little information. They tend to generalize a lot. Most people have a very polarized way of thinking. You know, we see this a lot with like the Republican-Democrat beef, especially. As I mentioned on this channel before, I'm very apolitical. I'm never really going to go down that route on this channel. But one thing that I did begin to notice over the last couple of years, particularly with Democrats or like the liberal left-leaning individuals, is that the moment they see someone that is conservative with their values or makes it known that they're a Republican, like they actually will openly say they're a Republican, they will automatically draw conclusions that those individuals, regardless of race, you know, if they're white, they'll draw conclusions that the person is racist inherently. If the person is black, they'll draw conclusions that the person is Uncle Tom, a sellout, and that they just hate being black and they hate other black people. Those are the automatic conclusions that they will come to solely based on that person's political affiliation, because they've convinced themselves that the liberal left Democrats equals good, conservative right Republicans equals bad guys. And that's how they navigate life in a nutshell. Like, that's how they think. And that is how the average person in this matrix navigates life, with a very polarized mindset and a very firm set of roles and responsibility that they designate or they expect other individuals to operate within. And then when they encounter someone that doesn't perfectly fit into a role that they have assigned for them in their head, it can be very disorienting for them. It can be very frustrating for them. And they can sometimes go out of their way to try to make you fit whatever it is that they have in their head, or whatever, however they think that you're supposed to be or operate. And there can be an almost insidious nature to their assumptions. You know, for example, say you're like a very confident black woman, that you're classy, you're an eloquent speaker, you have a really great job, you're very successful, but you come into a new organization, you come into a new job, and maybe the previous person that worked at that establishment fits your outward aesthetic as far as like your race is concerned and your gender, but the person was a little bit more of like an animated version of you, and they were maybe operating in a more stereotypical archetype of a black woman than you yourself operate in. And now your coworkers are expecting you to show up and kind of fill that void that previous coworker left, where they are expecting you to operate like that kind of caricature. And y'all know I love talking about energetic voids on this channel. Like, that's going to be a theme like that. I'm so in the headspace of like talking about energetic voids, but they expect you to fill that void that was left. They expect you to take on that character persona because they were so used to seeing someone that looks like you show up in that way and having that kind of energy in the office. So they now are impressing that upon you. However, because you're your own person, you're an individual, and you are not like that. It's genuinely not how your personality is set up. That's not how you show up in the world. You don't show up as a stereotypical archetype of the very overly animated black woman that is kind of like a court jester or like a clown, sassy, and like, you know, you're not like that. And speaking in a particular vernacular, you're carrying yourself in an unsavory way to kind of be like the class clown of the office. You don't show up in the world like that. But because your coworkers just lost someone who did, they're automatically projecting her behavioral traits on you and impressing that upon you, and they're projecting that onto you and having the expectation that you're going to come in and be that sassy black friend that's cracking all the jokes and providing the comic relief to the office. And because you're not actively taking that on, you're going to feel some resistance in that situation, because your presence is your non-conformity to that identity is going to cause confusion, because they're expecting you to show up as a caricature, and that's not you. So they're going to be confused why you're not operating the same way as that other woman, that past employee did, and it's going to cause conflict and tension within the workplace. They're then going to ultimately become standoffish towards you, and then project other unsavory traits of you being uncooperative. They're going to label you as standoffish. They're going to label you as pretentious, as stuck up. And then that's when you get the whole thing of, oh, she thinks that she's better than us. You get the people making up these whole ideas of you in their head when they're hating on you, or they don't understand you because you're not fitting into that role that they have in mind for you, that they have tried to designate to you and intend for you in their head. And I'm going to be perfectly honest. If you find yourself, even if you're not like this particular type of person, when you find yourself in these kind of situations, speaking from past experience, that's not a place that you want to be. That's not a kind of environment that you want to be in, where you're coming into an environment where they already have an intended role for you to show up as a particular way that's not genuine to yourself. You have to remove yourself in that situation. That's not a work environment that you can thrive in. So you're going to be met with consistent resistance because you're essentially outnumbered, and you're going to be expected to perform in a way that is unnatural to you. So you either have to leave, or unless if you're in dire straits and you really need the job, you're going to put on that clown hat. You're going to play the class clown and court jester for these people until you find another situation that's more ideal. Right. I wouldn't advise staying and trying to work it out. But obviously, if you need the job, you have to do what you have to do. But I always say in those kind of situations, you just need to exit stage left and go to another company or go into another environment where no one's going to expect you to like tap dance for them or perform in a particular type of way that's unnatural to you. And they're not going to have a kind of expectation of you. But that's just kind of an example of like how you can go into a situation completely unaware of how people expect you to show up for them and interact with them within their own bubble. Now, I want to go back to briefly talk about the whole energetic voids bit and how sometimes it can actually be beneficial to gather intelligence and understanding about a current void that exists in someone's life and who it was previously filled by and what they were like. Specifically when it comes to interpersonal relationships with people, this understanding of a void that was left can work in your benefit if you yourself try to figure out what kind of person another person was dealing with, specifically within a romantic relationship. That's something that I always encourage ladies to do, is gather an idea of what this person that you're dating, you're seeing, what were their exes like previously? Ideally, sometimes you even want to kind of know what they look like. What were the issues that they had in those previous relationships? What did the dynamic look like? And that can provide insight into the void that now exists in that person's life that you're trying to date, and how you could potentially fill it in a way that is beneficial for you both, right? And I'll use Shara 7 as an example, right? I've talked about her on this channel. One of the reasons why Shara was able to have success with James was because while he was married at the time when they met, the reason for conflict with his wife at that time was because, according to Shara, the wife was extremely career-oriented and very independent, and James didn't feel needed by her, right? So her age being aside, like Shara being a lot younger than James being aside, because the woman that James's wife looked just like an older version of Shara, but Shara being this younger person that was working but was still looking for someone to depend on, she was able to fulfill an energetic void in her future husband James's life by being that woman that needed him, by making him feel needed, right? There was a specific role that he was seeking to be filled that his wife at the time had currently left, right? Because she was operating in a space where she was very independent and self-assured on her own, and she didn't really need him. So she had kind of already removed a lot of her energy as a spouse within their relationship. leaving that void for someone else to come in and fill. And Shira was able to fill that because she came in with this energy of, I'm looking for a provider, you're a provider. And so by Shira approaching the relationship dynamic with James in that way, he was able to show up for her in a ways that he couldn't for his wife, who was making him feel inadequate. So that is an instance where you can maybe not necessarily know the role that the person has intended for you, but based on the knowledge that you have about their current relationship dynamic that they have, or what they dealt with in the past, and any kind of energetic void that was left, you then can know how you need to show up in order to accommodate the both of you. And you can plot and plan how you want to fill those kind of voids in order to have success with the person and make the situation beneficial for you both, right? So as a woman, I always encourage other women to pose questions first before the guy gets a chance to. A lot of times with like pickup artists, red pill men, wannabe players, they'll kind of try to prod and poke and pose those questions first to women to figure out like what void exists in the woman's life, and they can kind of pretend that they're going to be that for you until the mask slips. But when you're the first person to get those questions out of the way and kind of figure out what energetic void exists within that person's life, or discern whether or not one even exists, because sometimes you can figure out with that line of questioning whether or not that person has any kind of energetic voids in their life. If they make it clear that there isn't, then a lot of times that's an indicator that that person is getting a lot of their needs fulfilled by various different sources. And a lot of times that's an indicator that's a narcissist, but that's a video for another day. But the same line of questioning there is applicable to any other situation, work situations, friendships. When you're on a job interview and you ask, like, what is the current dynamic on the team? Who is the person that was filling this role specifically? How were they successful? How were they unsuccessful? Those are the kind of questions that you can ask that also make you look very good and very thoughtful, because it looks like you're trying to assess how the department is currently running and how you would fit in. And based on that line of questioning, they will begin to picture you being on their team. You know, they'll think about how they want you to fit in, how you would show up. And ideally, that's what you want in an interview situation. You want them to already be looking at you from the perspective of you already working there, like them already imagining you working there. And so based on the way that they answer their questions, you're also able to figure out for yourself, do I want to go into a working environment that's going to require me to wear multiple hats, right? Which usually is a no. That's a huge red flag if they say that. You're going to have to wear multiple hats and be adaptable. You know, if it's going to require you to work late nights and weekends, you know, right then and there, that's an opportunity for you to decide whether or not you even want to do that. So that's why it's important to figure out what kind of energetic voids already exist and whether or not you want to fulfill that specific role that is required to take it on and fill the void. Because ultimately the choice is yours, right? And it's all about you approaching life. Like me, even making a lot of these videos is about providing instructions and guidance on how to approach life from a perspective where it's not happening to you, it's happening with you. You're a very active player in this game. The advice that I'm providing on this channel is not for an NPC. This is for someone that's looking to be very interactive with their environment and garner the most from this earth plane and make it as beneficial of an experience as possible for themselves. This is not advice for someone that is just living life on autopilot and going through the motions of life. This is for someone that is looking to make the most of their time here and living in their purpose. So again, in closing, everyone that you encounter for the first time is automatically looking to assign some type of role to you in their story. And whether it be a sidekick, a girlfriend, a mistress, a maid, a mother, an assistant, a therapist, a leader, a mentor, a court jester, whatever, what have you, they're automatically looking to assign a specific role to you that they want or expect you to play. However, the choice is always yours as to whether or not you want to fulfill that role and fill that specific void that's occurring in that person's life. The choice is yours.